Here are the instructions for making the first block in our 2024 sampler. This is the block that we selected. It's made with 2 colors and includes half square triangles and large and small squares. You are not restricted though to making it in 2 colors. You can also make it with a different center square piece. So now you have the background, the design color, and then your center square color. And you can even make it, if you like, with an additional color by making the corners out of a 3rd fabric. About a decade ago, I went down to Charleston, South Carolina looking for spring and discovered a quilt shop, and I was a pretty brand new beginner, and they were selling this box of fabrics that they said represented Charleston and had been designed by someone connected to the quilt shop and printed, I believe, by Marcus Fabrics. And I fell in love with it and was sure I would make something right away. And 10 years later, I haven't touched it. So I thought it would be perfect for this quilt. And I wanted to make I was excited to start using my fabrics. So I am making a block with a background and 3 additional colors. Attached to the email that had the link for this video, you also have the instructions for cutting and constructing this block. So you can look at that email. There's also a second video with a link in your email to how to make half square triangles, and especially what we will need today, 8 at a time. So I'm all cut. This will be my center. No, this is going to be the piece that looks like a diamond around the edge, and it's going to get attached to this background piece, right sides together, and I'm going to follow the instructions on the video of how to turn this into 8 half square triangles. I also have cut my larger center square and my smaller corner squares and the background squares that go with those. Once I get my 16 really, half square triangles cut, I will continue. Now I'm going to go to the sewing machine, follow the instructions on the half square triangle video, and get these made. Well, I've made 16 half square triangles, and because I'm making the 12-inch finish block, I squared mine to 2.5 inches. Each one is going to end up at 2 inches completed, but I need that 1/4 inch all the way around, and the instructions on squaring up are in the video on half square triangles. So I have 16 of these, and now it's time for me to make the sections, the patches that will go together to make the block. This block is a 9 patch, which means it looks like a tic-tac-toe board. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's what a 9 patch is. And so this big guy is a patch all by himself. That's my this one. And then this right here is a patch. And this is a patch. And we have 4 of these and 4 of these. And the next thing to do is to construct 4 of these and 4 of these. So what you're going to do is take 2 half square triangles and put them so your color is touching. And you're going to sew those 2 together. Then you're going to take, gotta look at it, these 2 and put them so that the back background is touching. What you're making really is a chevron or an arrow. Once these two are sewed together and these two are sewed together, you will sew a seam right across here, and that will make your patch. And you're going to make 4 of those. And it's tricky. Every time I put it down, I do some wonky thing like this. And as my favorite first grader, when she was learning to read, said when she read the word wrong, "Does that look right?" "No." And she would try something else. I will love her forever, Katie Cafaro. So that is how you make this patch. The second patch is really quite easy. Well, you'll do 4 of these, and then the second patch is really quite easy. You have 3 corner pieces and 1 background piece. And it doesn't matter how you sew these together, you're going to rotate them around as needed when you make the final block. So you'll sew 2 together that are the same, and you'll sew 2 together that are different, and then you'll sew those 2 pieces together and you'll make 4 of those. And after I go and sew those, we'll come back and we'll put the 9 patches in the right order to make the block. I've made my patches for the block. I've made these chevrons or arrows, and I've made the corner pieces, and I still have my center focus piece. So this is a good time to talk about pressing seams. We say press to the dark, but that doesn't always work well, because you can end up with, if everything's pressed to the dark and then you're sewing 2 dark pieces to each other, you can end up with bulk on one side of the seam and just 1 piece of fabric on the other, and that can make a lump in your quilt. So when you press, or when you start to sew actually, if you've pressed in a direction that's going to make a bump, stop and press the other way. You also have the option, if you'll come in a little close on this block, you have the option of pressing open. So this worked, press to the dark, but this one I had to press to the light in order not to get a mess in here. And then I decided to press these open. And there's no right and wrong, but I just wanted you to know that you don't always have to press to the dark if it's going to be not the best thing for your quilt. Also, this is another chance you have to square up. You squared up your half square triangles, but now you've sewn them together and sewn them to each other. So for mine, I need a 4.5 inch block. If you're making the 18 inch blocks, you need a 6.5 inch block for each of these. So you'll measure onto that and you'll trim. Now, if your block is too small, if it isn't 4.5 or 6.5, that means that something went wrong either in your cutting or in your seam sewing. This is where it really matters that you have a scant 1/4 inch seam. And scant 1/4 inch means just a thread or 2 on the fabric to the side of the seam, to the outside of the seam. Because the thread itself, your sewing thread, takes up space, and the folding takes up space. And so it doesn't matter in a tiny piece like this. But if we start having 5 or 6 seams across the top of the block, and each one is just a tiny bit too small, each block piece is just a tiny bit too small, the seam's a tiny bit too wide, you can lose a 1/4 inch. And in a big quilt, you can lose inches by making each seam a little too wide. And this is a great way to check. It's your first block, you have time to fix it, you haven't gotten too far along. So make sure that your 4.5 inch block is 4.5 inches or a little more, and you can trim it. Your 6.5 inch block is 6.5 inches or a little more, and you can trim it. So now I know each of these is 4.5 inches, and I can put my block together. So this would go in the middle, and then my chevrons or arrowheads, or however you think of them, are placed around that center, with each one pointing to the outside. And then the 4 corner blocks go on with the background piece toward the center. So that's how it looks. That's how it's going to look when it is sewed together. And that will be my block. Now, I just want to point out that this is not a directional fabric. These little, whatever they are, white things, are randomly placed on here. I don't actually turn out to like this fabric. I don't know why I chose it. I chose it because I didn't like it, so I thought, oh, I'll put it in the corners and it won't matter. I have a whole box of pink and brown fabrics. I never need to put this in my quilt. I don't know what I was thinking. So I've changed my mind, and I am going to make corner blocks with this fabric. And you can see that this fabric is directional. So it has like a stripe in it. So as I make this new set of corner patches, I am going to pay attention to that. I could put them randomly together, but you know, I'm very matchy-matchy. I am going to make all of the lines pointing in the same direction when I sew this together. Not important to everyone, important to me. So now my job is to make my new corner patches and sew it together. And your job, if you're ready, is to sew this patch to this patch to this patch, this to this to this, and this to this to this. So you'll have 3 rows. Then this will fold over, face right sides together, and you'll sew a seam here. This will fold up, and you'll sew a seam here, and your block will be complete. And then you will again square it up at either 12.5 for the smaller quilt or 18.5 for the larger quilt.